Did I ever tell you what the definition of insanity is? Insanity is doing the exact same thing over and over again, expecting to change. That is crazy.
Okay, bye-bye.
Ubisoft has a problem. Actually, they have a lot of problems right now, but we're talking about this one today. You see, the players of Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six Siege, well, they're just not playing the game correctly. Now, you might be wondering, how could somebody play a video game incorrectly? But in Siege's case, the answer is pretty simple. Being too good at the game, having fun, and using your brain. All of these are considered crimes against the state, punishable by 20 years of mediocre open worlds.
Star Wars Outlaws.
Ubisoft are control freaks. They have a very specific vision for exactly how they want everything in the game to be used, raging against anything that steps out of line and desperately trying to force the meta into something they like. And they're going to do this whether the players like it or not, and even if their own goals contradict each other. Confused? Good. Watch the other video first. Now buckle up, kids. Daddy's booze cruise in this short bus. Ubisoft's greatest challenge, besides making a game that people actually want to play, is players' insistence on choosing guns over gadgets. People say that's because players treat the game like Call of Duty. It's me. I said that. They act like this is because the average player is just too stupid to understand the deep complexities of shock wall, unshock wall. But this is a very oversimplified way of looking at things and misses something very important. People are always going to pick what they feel provides them the most benefit. Be the most effective at winning the round. You know, meta, most effective tactic available. And what's the most important part of an operator's kit? It's not the gadget, it's the gun.
Why are you boring me? I'm right.
Gadgets are obviously important, but it's really easy to end up bringing the wrong one. Like by picking Sens. Your choice could be countered by the enemy team, or your gadget might never be used, or is just completely ignored by the enemy team. Hell, your gadget could actually end up hurting your team. Like by picking Sens. But what's something that's almost guaranteed to be used every round? That's right, the chat. And also your gun. And unlike gadgets, there's absolutely no way you could harm your team with these. What's interesting is when you listen to the developers talk about weapon balance, they only ever seem to focus on KD. What gun has the highest KD so we can send it to the Shadow Realm? But something they seem to conveniently forget is how KD directly translates into round wins. The fact is that almost every round ends when one team is dead. So bringing something to expedite that process is probably a good idea. And from a player's perspective, using a good gun can have a much more tangible benefit than having a good gadget. It's pretty obvious when you're using a good gun and the benefits it provides, but it's not always obvious if your gadget is really doing anything. Maybe catching a few grenades will help your team, but if you end up losing the gunfight that follows, that's probably going to hurt your team a lot more, and the raw numbers back this up. Jaeger still has an amazing gadget, but for years he's had a negative win rate, because his gun
just fucking sucks, man. Fucking sucks.
And this goes for other ops like Cade and Wamai. Great gadgets, terrible guns, terrible win rate. None of this is to say that gadgets are important, but the cold hard truth of it is, if you really want to win, bringing a good gun is more likely to get you that win than bringing a good gadget. Players choosing to prioritize guns over gadgets will continue to increase over time for multiple reasons. The main reason, and the one I went into detail in the last video, is that the average skill in the player base increases over time. The skill ceiling for most of the gadgets isn't that high. There's a pretty hard limit on how good you can get with most of them, but there's no limit on how good the players can get with guns. And as the average skill in the player base increases, they reach the limit of what the gadgets are capable of, and they begin to lean more on the guns. Naturally, this means over time more players will leverage their own abilities to get an advantage, rather than having to rely on the operator abilities. But beyond people getting better, Ubisoft's own design goals are pushing players towards guns. They've stated on several occasions that they want 100 operators in Siege, while bringing their own unique gadgets. And pronouns. And while saving the world through tolerance and inclusivity is a fine goal, something I'm not sure they accounted for is that adding a ton of different gadgets is actually going to push people to use gadgets less.
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And that's because the more gadgets they add, the more variables they add to every round, and the greater the chance you didn't bring the right tool for the job. But again, what's something that will always be useful, regardless of the situation? At the same time they're adding all these new variables, they're making the existing operators less versatile. Ubisoft themselves have stated on multiple occasions they don't want jack-of-all-trade characters. They say they're trying to give everything a unique role and distinct place in the game. But in practice, what actually happens is that they try to force everything to fit into a very specific role by restricting the capabilities of all the operators and gadgets. Basically, make everything underpowered. This sucks for a lot of reasons. It was obviously fun, but we'll get to that.
Oh, hi, Mark.
But what's interesting is how this undermines their own goals in multiple ways. Ubisoft say they want more gadget interactions, and operators being more versatile creates more opportunities for people to interact with the game's mechanics. I mean, it's pretty obvious when you think about it. If an operator isn't restricted to one predefined role, then that means they're more flexible and more capable of engaging with different systems and playstyles. And if the gadgets were more powerful, they'd have more impact and could interact with more mechanics, meaning that at any given time there'd be a greater chance that you'd have a gadget that could engage with whatever the current situation is. And sometimes they do take a step in the right direction, like by adding impact EMP so that more operators can help open the wall. But at the exact same time, they'll then take another step in the wrong direction by nerfing other alternatives, making it harder for more operators to engage with the system. Ubisoft also want to even out the pick rates and avoid must-pick operators, but they don't seem to realize that by trying to force every operator into one predefined role each, they're actively making this problem worse. And that's because some roles are just objectively more important than others. There are a few things that are guaranteed in every round of Rainbow Six Siege: unfiltered racism and homophobia, cheaters ruining the match, and things breaking. Usually the code. But assuming the game can keep its shit together for more than 5 seconds, then it's breaking the other team's stuff. Roles like hard breach and soft breach are always going to be more important than roles like flank watch, or whatever the hell Sens does. Ashe has always been one of those popular picks in the game because she's really good at blowing stuff up, and blowing stuff up is always going to be important. And assuming they did somehow get every operator to perfectly fit into one role each, they then need to somehow make every role equally as important as every other role. And somehow, I don't see bees ever being as important as making the West Sea the guiding light of a lot. If they buffed operators and made them more versatile, it would help even out the pick rates, because it would allow essential jobs to be done by multiple operators, even if they can't do it as efficiently as somebody who's dedicated to the role. But again, they've gone in the exact opposite direction, and this approach doesn't exactly lead to inspired design decisions. I mean, look at somebody like Tubarão, the sanitized Ubisoft-approved alternative to impact tricking. For those of you who are watching this video but don't play Siege, I see you. I'm watching you. But basically, impact tricking is a sort of last-ditch effort to stop the wall from being opened. By landing an impact just on the other side of the reinforcement, it can break the hard breach charge. Ubisoft liked the idea, but you're not supposed to do that with impacts. So we're going to reduce the size of the explosions and remove that tech from the game. Instead, you can play Tubarão, who's kinda similar, but not nearly as good as just blowing the thing up. People didn't usually pick impact specifically to impact trick. It was usually a spur-of-the-moment decision that rewarded players for thinking fast, finding a creative solution, and engaging with the game's mechanics in a fun and unique way. But now you're not supposed to think. I'm not picking this because it allows me to engage with the game's mechanics in a fun and interesting way. I'm picking it because it's rock and they have scissors. And outsmarting your opponent for thinking fast is a lot more rewarding than just being the right character. And while we're on the topic, what happens if they don't go for the wall? If you brought impacts, no problem, they have a lot of uses. But if you brought Tubarão, well, his only real use is wall denial, and he's not even good at it. He can't actually stop them. All he can really do is just slow them down and waste everybody's time. So it's not a surprise that nobody bothers to bring him. Or look at frag grenades. Before, if you wanted to blow something up, multiple operators could do that. Sure, Ashe was the best at it, but other operators could still get the job done with frag grenades. But then they nerfed frags, basically forcing everyone to pick Ashe. But why did frags need to get nerfed? Well, because good players could bypass the correct counters. Literally, the players are playing the game wrong. And it can't be the players are using the correct counters wrong. No. The player's using a gadget in an unintended way. That's what's wrong. These changes are so emblematic of the problem with Ubisoft's entire approach to design. Well, we can't have players learning to do something that wasn't explicitly intended in order to play the game most effectively. That might muddy our incredibly specific and restrictive vision for what this thing is meant to be doing. This extremely restrictive design means that each operator has a distinctly correct way to play them. I don't have a playstyle with Mute. Mute has a playstyle. And it's so frustrating as a player. Don't tell me how I'm supposed to use my gadget, or how I'm supposed to play the operator. Having an end goal and a bunch of potential solutions, and getting told, figure it out, is fun, and leads to a lot of creative problem solving. To badly paraphrase from Jakey, it's like playing with Legos. You could follow the instructions, this piece here, that piece there, then play like this, and that's an okay way to play, but the real fun is when you dive into the bin and come up with something a bit more unorthodox.
You pissed up!
Back when I actually enjoyed playing this game, I was a Maverick main. His blowtorch combined with his frag grenades gave him an incredibly high skill ceiling, and there was all sorts of tech you could learn with him. It gave him a very distinct playstyle that rewarded creative and thoughtful gameplay. Rather than having one ability that worked the exact same way every time, it required players to actually think beyond round block, round hole, square block, really big fucking square hole. You wouldn't look at him and think, this is what this character is supposed to do, but rather, I wonder what all I can do with that. So when me and my friends needed to get a wall open, we had a pretty unique way of doing it. Before impact EMPs, Thatcher was banned almost every single round, and no one wanted to play Cali. It was pretty common for walls to just not get open, which is a problem, because I need to get in your reach. To get around this, we would use Maverick. By cutting a hole near the top of the wall, you can throw a grenade through and blow up the shock, and possibly the shocker. At first glance, this might seem overpowered, but there was actually a surprising amount of counterplay. They could bring Jaeger to catch our grenades, so we'd have to coordinate burning the ADS with throwing the frags. They could use Cade and put the claw in a weird spot the grenade couldn't reach, so we'd ban Cade and force him to play Bandit. And even if we did get the shock off the wall, they could still impact trick back through the hole, or do a classic runout, or some fucking legends would just nail the Bandit trick. That entire playstyle, that gameplay loop that blended gadgets, counterplay, teamwork, and gunfighting, it's gone. They removed it from the game. Maverick lost his frags to make room for impact EMPs. Frags themselves have been nerfed multiple times. Nobody brings Jaeger anymore because his gun is awful, and impact tricking is way less effective. And this is why Ubisoft's approach sucks. They take things that work, things that players love using, different ways to play the game, and they just throw them away. And it's infuriating to be told by the developers that you're playing the game wrong, over and over and over. And consistently punishing players for playing the game in the wrong way doesn't exactly incentivize players to engage with the mechanics. Why would I bother learning how to play the game in an interesting or creative way if at any given time it can just be deleted? At least if I'm good at shooting, you can't take that away, even though they're gonna try. How about instead of nerfing the popular things, why not try buffing the things that aren't? On console, a full third of the defending roster is getting played less than 5% of the time. And for some reason, Ubisoft doesn't see that as a problem. They'd rather focus on trying to micromanage what's allowed in the meta. I said this before and I'll say it again. A meta isn't designed, it's discovered. You can't force people to play the game a certain way by removing what they're using. Because they didn't want Ashe to be meta. Then it was Zofia. Then it was Sledge. Then it was Iana. Then Tower 7 collapsed all on its own. Then it was Finka. Now it's Ashe again. What exactly do you want the meta to be? Oh, well, they don't want there to be a meta. That isn't how that works. There has to be a meta. By definition, there's always going to be a most effective tactic available. There's always going to be something that players feel give them the most benefits. If something is popular, it means that thing works. It's effective, and or players really like using it. If you nerf the shit out of it, yeah, it might not be meta anymore. But you also piss off all your players by removing something they liked, and now they need to go find something else that works. And ironically, by doing this, it makes it harder to control the meta, because you don't know what the players are going to start using. It's the reason we keep ending up in these ridiculous metas, like with LMGs, or Warden, and now Shields and the Boss G, I guess. And now everyone's using it, and it's gonna get nerfed, and I was using it first. Stop using it, I need a spawn peak! But you can't incentivize people to use something specific by buffing it. Because if you buff something, it's safe to assume that people will start to use that thing more. Which is good, because things being overpowered is just better. In a game, everything can be underpowered and balanced, but alternatively, everything can be overpowered and balanced. And things being overpowered is just way more fun. Only ever nerfing things takes away player agency and removes different ways to play the game. Whereas buffs give players more options and more ways to play the game. Plus, it's known that losing something has a much larger negative effect on people than the positive effect of gaining something. And seeing as how heavily Ubisoft favors nerfs over buffs, it's no wonder the player base is always so angry.
Shut the fuck up, I don't owe you bitch the answer, you here watching me!
And even though Ubisoft clearly doesn't care about what the players want, something they should probably learn is that everything being overpowered can actually make it easier to balance in a lot of ways. And that's because there's a limit on how bad things can realistically get. And the closer you push everything towards that lower limit, the harder it is to get nuance. If everything is powerful, there's a lot more room to work with, and it means that adding new elements is a lot less likely to destabilize the meta. If you wanted to add, say, a new attachment, there's more room to work it in. But if everyone's a window licker, then there's not a lot of room to work with, and suddenly the exact same attachment is way too strong. In fact, if you give it to most operators, they become too strong. So how do we fix this? Well, you could try nerfing the rest of their kit to make room for the attachment, but everything is already so weak that there's not a lot of room to work with, unless you want to completely cripple an operator. And the more you do this, the more it'll make powerful things stand out. So it'd be pretty stupid if this was the approach that they took.
Fuck!
This is why it was so hard to balance the 1.5. They kept nerfing everything and pushing everything closer together. Eventually it got to the point where no matter who had the 1.5, it was too strong. And there was no nuance with the 1.5. You either had it, or you didn't. Eventually they just gave up and deleted it from the game, and replaced it with the ACOG. I'm sure that'll solve the issue. It didn't solve shit. Ubisoft, I know this is going to be hard to hear, but I don't think you can nerf your way out of this one. If you want to offset the strength of the ACOG, you're probably going to have to buff some stuff.
No.
Ubisoft are mistaking useful for overpowered, and overpowered with unfair. They see data showing something is getting picked a lot and just assume it's a problem that needs to be corrected. But the problem with this heavily data-driven approach is it doesn't often accurately reflect the reality of the situation. And this may be presumptuous to say, but I think there's a fundamental misunderstanding in a lot of the community and even some of the developers about the relationship between guns, gadgets, and pick rates. The idea that how good an operator's gun is and how good their gadget is directly build on top of each other to determine their pick rate. The problem with viewing it this way is that it implies that guns and gadgets are competing to perform the same role in the game, and that one can make up for the other. But in reality, the utility an operator brings and how lethal they are, those are completely separate metrics. And because most rounds are determined by last man standing, the actual viability of an operator is mostly bottlenecked by their lethality. The purpose of gadgets is not to be a substitute for guns. It's to facilitate better gunfights. But Siege wants to be the thinking man shooter, so it often gets compared to chess.
Mike is throbbing.
But this comparison is a bit misleading, because in chess, once you've outsmarted your opponent, you won. But in Siege, once you've outsmarted your opponent, you haven't won yet. You still gotta shoot him. And most importantly, in Siege, you don't actually need to outsmart your opponent. You can just skip straight to shooting them in the face. You know, Ubisoft make a lot of statements about how they want their game to be, but they never explain why the game should be that way. Pick rate should all be equal. Okay, why? We don't want jack of all trade characters. Okay, why? Gadgets need to take priority over guns. Okay, why? If they managed to get all the pick rates equal, if every operator performed one role each, and if the players would just stop being so good at shooting, would that really make the game better? I doubt it, and to get there you would have to spend years tearing up the meta chasing an impossible task. But to be fair, these videos do take forever to make, and since I started working on this one, something amazing happened. They released a patch that was all buffs, followed by another patch with even more buffs, ignore that one. And this only started after my video calling them a bunch of baguette-eating morons who couldn't balance a bicycle. That's right, I'm taking credit for this one. Forget Jinxie, I saved Siege! Savior of Siege, driver of forklifts, topper of Twinks, defrauder of Home Depot.
You're not an intellectual. You're a fake and a fraud.
That last one's not a joke, by the way. After several disagreements and a fraud investigation, me and the Home Depot have decided to part ways. Which means I have to set up the Patreon because I said I would set it up after work, which I guess is now. So do the obligatory YouTube shill thing so I can continue to make these unhinged rants. So just to summarize for the glue eaters in the back that got lost along the way. Stop nerfing the popular things, continue to buff the underperforming things, don't try to micromanage the meta, allow it to develop naturally because pick rates don't matter. And defraud the Home Depot.